Would you believe a forgotten dog trapped behind a wall could change the course of a baby's life forever? Just by listening to something no one else could hear, something beyond brick and concrete, something that made a whole town stop in their tracks and hold their breath, wondering how they could have missed the miracle growing silent just inches beneath their feet. In the quiet town of Green Rock, nestled between weather-worn hills and sleepy stretches of farmland, mornings moved like molasses, slow and predictable. The kind of place where neighbors still waved from porches and children rode bicycles without helmets on, roads with no traffic lights. A place where nothing dramatic ever really happened until that one ordinary Tuesday when a toddler named Noah crawled toward a crumbling wall behind his grandparents' home and did something no one saw coming, something that would wake up the entire neighborhood and unearth a secret no one had expected to find. It's a secret with fur, eyes full of stories, and a past buried under cement and time. Noah had just turned one, chubby cheeks glowing from the early September sun, fingers always sticky with mashed banana or drool, and his giggle, pure and bubbly, echoed through the garden like music that made even the grumpiest mailman smile. A baby who had barely learned to balance, but had somehow mastered the art of curiosity, tugging at weeds, chasing butterflies he could never catch, reaching out to the world with his tiny palms open, as if asking it to show him more. His parents, Lila and Daniel, were both young, both still figuring out how to be parents, still getting used to sleep deprivation and the strange peace that came with rocking a child at 3 a.m. under moonlight shadows on the nursery wall. It decided to spend a few weeks with Daniel's aging parents to let Noah feel the warmth of generational love, the kind of comfort that came with wrinkled hands, old lullabies, the scent of cinnamon tea, always brewing somewhere in the background. The backyard of the house was wide and wild, overgrown with wildflowers and uneven stone paths, and it had one long concrete wall at the far edge. Once part of an abandoned tool shed, now lost to ivy and neglect, a wall that had been there longer than the family itself, cracked from time and rains, leaning ever so slightly like it held stories no one had listened to in years. And that morning, when the sun was rising soft and golden, Lila was inside folding Noah's laundry, humming too, herself as the baby played just outside with a wooden spoon and a bucket of dried leaves, safe and smiling, or so she thought. But Noah, drawn by a sound only he seemed to notice, a soft shuffle maybe, a muffled thump behind the old wall, abandoned his bucket, wobbling upright and toddling toward the far edge of the garden. Grass brushing against his legs, his tiny fingers, brushing the stones as he got closer, closer, until he was just inches from the wall, placing one hand against it and tilting his head like he was listening to something from another world. On the other side, hidden behind layers of stone and dust, a German shepherd stood completely still, his body aching, his fur tangled and matted from weeks of entrapment, his eyes sunken but sharp, his ears twitching at every outside sound, like a soldier trained for alertness, like a protector with no one left to protect until now. He'd stopped barking days ago, his voice worn down to silence, but he never stopped hoping, never stopped listening, especially when he heard the giggle. That high-pitched, innocent sound of a child, something he hadn't heard since the day he was taken from his old life, and suddenly every bone in his body told him to move, to let the world know he was still there. He wasn't ready to be forgotten. Inside the house, Lila glanced out the window, smiling at the sight of her baby by the wall. But then her smile faded. Something felt strange. An instinct, perhaps. That mother's sixth sense kicking in, and she dropped the towel in her hands and rushed outside, calling Noah's name as she stepped barefoot into the grass. Eyes scanning until she saw, if the wall had shifted, a chunk of concrete had fallen to the side, and there, standing inside a hollowed space like some ancient statue, was a full-grown German shepherd, dirt-covered and panting. His eyes locked, not on her, but on the baby just inches from him. Not aggressive, not afraid, just watchful, calm, as if he'd been waiting for this very moment. Lila screamed, a reflex, a mother's panic in full volume. And Daniel came running, heart pounding, expecting the worst. But what they saw next was something neither of them would ever forget. The dog, slow and careful, took one step forward. From the shadows of the wall, placed his paw gently in front of Noah as if shielding him, and then sat still and composed, letting the baby crawl into his fur like it was the most natural thing in the world. And that's when the questions began. The flood of neighbors and animal control and reporters and vets, but the story had only just begun. Because what no one knew yet was that this dog had been trapped for over 3 weeks, hidden in the hollow space of a sealed-off wall, without food, without light, without anyone knowing. And yet he had survived, silently, patiently, waiting, listening, and when the time came, he didn't bark. He didn't bite, waited for the child, like he knew. That child would save him, or maybe he would save the child. And in the days that followed, as the story spread, as people whispered in coffee shops and posted photos online, no one could quite explain it, how the baby and the dog found each other in that exact moment. How a toddler barely able to speak could hear what no one else could, and why the dog chose that child to trust. But what they all agreed on was this: something about it felt bigger than coincidence. Something about it made them believe in quiet miracles, and some even said the dog must have been sent for a reason. Tell me this, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Because sometimes these stories find us when we need them the most. Sometimes we all need a reminder that loyalty and love can survive even the thickest walls, and that heroes don't always bark the loudest. Sometimes they just wait, silently, until the right heart hears them. The town may have moved on to whispers and speculations, but inside the modest home at the edge of Green Rock, something had shifted. A connection had been made that no one could quite explain. A toddler barely past his first birthday had reached through cracked concrete and pulled a life back into the world. And now, as neighbors returned to their routines and the local news vans packed up and drove away, Leela and Daniel sat in their quiet living room staring at the German Shepherd lying beside Noah's crib, his head resting gently on the wood, his breathing slow and steady, as if he'd always belonged there, as if the baby's steady heartbeat calmed him more than any warm blanket ever could. And though they hadn't planned for a dog, hadn't discussed adopting or rescuing, or even the possibility that a stranger covered in dust would become part of their family, they couldn't bring themselves to ask him to leave, not after what he'd been through, and especially not after the way Noah had reacted to him, crawling, babbling, tugging at his ears gently, sleeping deeper and longer, with the dog curled nearby, like a guardian placed there by something higher, something unspoken. The vet had come and gone. A kind woman named Dr. Ellis, who'd seen all kinds of trauma in her years but admitted she'd never encountered anything quite like this. A dog estimated to be around 6 or 7 years old, muscular once but now, visibly worn down from hunger and isolation, with signs of dehydration and a cracked paw pad, but still no major infections, no parasites, no broken bones. And when she listened to his heart, she paused and said quietly, as if talking more to herself than anyone else, This one didn't survive by accident, and she left them with antibiotics, a special diet, a warning to monitor him closely for signs of shock or aggression. Though even she admitted his temperament was remarkably gentle, especially considering his ordeal. But what Leela noticed most wasn't his scars or silence, it was his eyes. A deep honey brown, swirling with something old, something haunted and wise, like he'd seen more than most and remembered every bit of it. And when she sat beside him, just inches from Noah's crib, he looked up at her not like a stranger or a pet, but like a guardian with a purpose, as if to say, I've seen pain, but I'm here now, and your boy is safe. Daniel, ever the skeptic, had his doubts at first, wary of trusting an unknown animal around their child. But even he couldn't deny the shift in the house, how calmer Noah seemed, how fewer tantrums erupted, how Lila smiled more, slept more, laughed again, and late one night, when he returned from a store run, to find the lights off and the dog sitting alert at the front door, not barking, not pacing, just waiting for him like he was expected, Daniel sighed and knelt, scratching behind the dog's ears and whispering, All right, buddy, I get it. You're one of us now. They named him Bricks, half joking at first, after the wall he'd been trapped in, but somehow the name stuck. became a badge of survival and strength, and every morning, Bricks followed Noah's stroller around the backyard like a quiet shadow, letting the child poke at his nose, tug at his tail, and press sticky fingers into his fur, never flinching, never pulling away, and every evening, after Noah drifted to sleep, Bricks would curl beside the nursery door and not move until sunrise. But questions still lingered. How had he gotten in there? Who had sealed him inside? And why had no one noticed? Daniel started asking around, talking to the previous owners of the property, digging through old town records, and discovered that 10 months prior, a construction company had done maintenance work on the back lot, patching up cracked retaining walls and sealing off unsafe structures, including that very tool shed wall. And while no one had reported a missing dog, one name kept surfacing in whispers: an old man named Gerald Whitmore, a reclusive veteran who had passed away just days before Bricks was found, and who had once been seen walking a German Shepherd near that lot almost daily. It didn't take much to put the pieces together. Bricks had belonged to Gerald, and when the shed was being sealed, no one noticed the dog had followed him in. Maybe for shelter, maybe for comfort, and the wall was closed up unknowingly, leaving Bricks trapped with no light, no sound, no food but the rainwater dripping through cracks, and somehow, for nearly 3 weeks, he'd survived. Waiting in that tomb of concrete, bones pressing against skin, instincts dulling until the sound of a baby giggle pierced the silence like a lifeline and brought him back to the world. And the more they learned, the more they saw that Bricks hadn't just survived, he'd chosen to wait, chosen not to panic or claw, but to listen, to wait for the right soul to find him. And when Noah appeared, when those tiny blue eyes looked into his, something ancient inside the dog recognized him. As if fate had wrapped 2 timelines together and decided that this child, untouched by the past, would become the future Bricks had been waiting for. The days passed softly, autumn winds whispering through the trees, and one night, as rain tapped gently against the nursery windows, Lila awoke to a strange stillness, a kind of silence that wasn't normal, that felt too heavy, too hollow, and her heart pounded as she tiptoed into Noah's room, expecting to see Bricks curled up by the door, but instead she found him sitting up, alert, head tilted, staring at the crib with such focus it made her stop in her tracks. And then, without warning, Bricks let out a single, sharp bark, not loud or frantic, but urgent, full of intent, and Lila rushed forward, flipping on the light, eyes darting to the crib, and froze. Noah's face was flushed, his breathing shallow, his lips tinged slightly blue. And before panic could overtake her, her arms were scooping him up, her voice shouting for Daniel. The room exploding in motion as they called 911, raced to the car, drove through red lights to the hospital, where doctors would later tell them that Noah had suffered a sudden respiratory reaction, likely due to a rare allergic flare-up, one that could have been fatal had they not arrived when they did. But thanks to Bricks, who sensed something even the monitors hadn't, they had made it in time. And that's when something shifted in Daniel and Lila. And everyone who heard the story, this wasn't just a rescue dog. He was a rescuer. A soul who'd survived the silence to save another. And as the town heard what had happened, as the news spread again, people began showing up at the house, some with treats, others with letters. One little girl with a drawing of Bricks and Noah that now hung on their fridge, a reminder that sometimes the ones we think need saving are the ones who end up saving us. And now, as you listen, as you sit wherever you are, maybe on your porch, or during your drive, or while folding laundry, I want to ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? Because maybe, just maybe, this story found you at the exact time you needed to remember that hope is real, that love has fur, and that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear dust and wait behind forgotten walls for the right soul to show them the way home. It had been 3 weeks since Bricks had stepped out of the wall and into Noah's life. And while the town slowly resumed its routine, the small house at the edge of Green Rock had become something more than just a home. It had become a quiet sanctuary, a sacred space stitched together by the unlikely bond between a baby too young to speak and a dog who'd gone too long without being heard. and every day now felt a little different, not louder or more chaotic, but deeper somehow. Like everything around them had gained more meaning, more weight, more beauty. Even the simple things like the way Noah would reach out to grab Brick's ear during his nap, or how Bricks would nudge Noah's toys gently toward him when they rolled out of reach, or the way Lila found herself looking at the world with softened eyes, catching herself smiling for no reason other than knowing her child had someone watching him at all times, someone who never asked for anything in return, someone who had no words, but spoke volumes with his silence. Daniel, who once believed life needed to be controlled and predictable, had started to let go of his grip, finding comfort in the unknown. In the surrender of knowing you can't always explain what's real, but you can feel it when it's there. And every evening after dinner, he'd sit on the porch with Bricks at his feet, sipping coffee and staring into the dusk, sometimes whispering his thoughts to the dog like he was speaking to an old friend, a friend who didn't judge or interrupt, just listened with eyes that somehow made you feel understood. But it was 1 week before Thanksgiving when something happened that no one saw coming, something that would test their faith in Bricks again, and this time, test their entire town, because what began as a soft breeze on a Wednesday afternoon turned into a furious storm by nightfall, a surprise squall that whipped through the region with the kind of reckless fury that made power lines snap like twigs and tree branches claw against windows like desperate fingers. And Lila, who had grown up in the Midwest, knew what storms could do. Had memories of hiding in basements and listening to hail-pound rooftops like war drums, but she had never faced one as a mother, never had to worry about a sleeping baby, and the terrifying question of whether their home was strong enough to keep them safe. As the lights flickered and finally went out, Daniel lit candles and brought Noah into the living room, laying him gently in the portable crib beside the couch, while Bricks stood at the window, tail still, ears perked, body rigid with the kind of alertness that didn't come from fear, but from deep instinct. The kind of alertness only animals seem to possess when nature turns cruel. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, uprooting trash cans, sending loose objects tumbling down the street, and somewhere in the darkness, a transformer blew with a flash of green light and a thunderous bang, sending the town into full blackout. And that's when it happened, the knock. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't loud, just 3 soft taps on the door, like a whisper with knuckles, and both Leela and Daniel froze, eyes locked, candles flickering, hearts pounding, and before either of them could move, Bricks was already there, standing squarely in front of the door, not growling, not barking, staring, unmoving, like a statue sculpted from muscle and resolve. Daniel approached slowly, heart in his throat, unsure if it was real, unsure if the storm had played tricks on their ears. And when he opened the door, cautiously, hand on the chain lock, he found no one there, just darkness, wet leaves blowing. Across the porch, wind howling past his cheeks, but Bricks didn't back away. Instead, he pushed forward gently, stepping outside with quiet urgency. Nose lifted to the air, then to the ground, sniffing, tracking something, and without warning, he took off not like a wild sprint, but a purposeful, controlled dash down the path behind the house, toward the woods, toward the old trail that had once led to the shed, now overgrown and forgotten. Daniel hesitated, calling after him, but Bricks didn't turn, didn't stop. And something deep inside Daniel told him not to wait, not to question, so he grabbed a flashlight, slipped into his boots, and followed the dog through the rain, through branches that scraped his arms, through mud that clung to his legs, till they reached the clearing where the wall had once stood in. What he saw there made him drop the flashlight. The earth had given way. The roots beneath the wall had finally buckled under the weight of the rain and age, and a shallow sinkhole had opened just beneath the corner of the garden where the shed used to be, revealing a hollow chamber, dark and damp, and inside it was a bundle of bones wrapped in a weathered, tattered military jacket. Daniel's breath caught in his throat, hands trembling, and Bricks stood at the edge of the hole, tail still, eyes locked on the remains with a recognition that cut deeper than anything words could describe. And in that moment, Daniel understood this. Was Gerald Whitmore, Bricks' original owner, the man who had vanished months ago, soon to have left town or moved to a care facility, but who had never made it out of that shed, who must have collapsed there during one of his routine visits, his disappearance dismissed as unimportant by a town too busy to look deeper. And Bricks, loyal to his final breath, had stayed with him, had entered that shed and refused to leave. Even as the walls closed in, even as hunger gnawed and loneliness ached, because his duty wasn't done and his loyalty didn't end when the world stopped looking. Daniel dropped to his knees, rain soaking his clothes, and reached out to touch Brick's fur, whispering, "You stayed with him, didn't you, all this time?" And the dog let out a low whine, not of pain, but of release, of a burden finally lifted, of a circle finally closed. Later, when authorities arrived, when the remains were respectfully recovered, and the town came to terms with its mistake, with the life it had overlooked, no one questioned the miracle anymore. No one saw Bricks as just a rescue dog, not after. Knowing he had given part of his soul to watch over a man until death, and another part to watch over a child so life could begin. And in the days that followed, as the sun returned and the power came back and the leaves dried and fluttered again, Noah laughed like nothing had happened, like the storm was just another story in the wind. But Bricks watched him differently. Now, not just as a protector, but as someone finally free to live, free to love, free to belong again. So I'll ask again, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? Because if this moment found you in the middle of something you don't yet understand, if you're wondering whether silent loyalty still exists, whether love that asks for nothing still survives in the noise of this world, let this story remind you it does. It always has. You just have to be quiet enough to hear the dog behind the wall. The days after the storm moved slowly, like the town itself was holding its breath, processing what had been uncovered beneath that broken garden wall. It's not just the remains of an old man named Gerald Whitmore, but something deeper, something heavier, the quiet realization that a life had ended in silence while the world went on whistling past it. That a man who once served his country, who once walked this town's sidewalks with a proud stride and a leash in hand, disappeared without so much as a headline, and it was only because of the loyal creature he left behind that his story was ever told, and the guilt of that, the raw, unflinching weight of it, rippled through Green Rock like a slow-moving wave of shame and awakening. The mayor, a tall, overly formal man named Carlton Bryce, who usually spoke only during ribbon cuttings or town fairs, showed up unannounced at Lila and Daniel's doorstep 2 mornings later, hat in hand, eyes softer than usual, and asked if they would be willing to speak at a memorial service they were organizing for Gerald. A proper farewell, not just for the man, but for the sacrifice his companion made. And though Daniel was hesitant at first, unsure if it was for show or substance, Bricks trotted to the porch and sat beside him, not growling or alert, just calm. And in that moment, something passed between the two, men one with a title and one with no words, and Daniel nodded slowly, saying we'll be there. The days that followed were filled with phone calls, camera crews, flower arrangements, and the uncomfortable glare of local fame. Something neither Lila nor Daniel wanted, but something they bore for the sake of truth, for the sake of telling. A story that deserved more than whispers and backyard fences. Meanwhile, Bricks changed, not in the way broken things change, but in the way survivors do. Like something inside him had been unlocked, a kind of permission to move forward, to live fully again.
Ow.
And though he still slept outside Noah's room, every night, tail flicking gently with the rhythm of the child's breath, he also began to play again, chasing leaves in the yard, carrying sticks in his mouth with pride and letting out soft barks whenever Daniel pulled into the driveway, as if each return was another reminder that he didn't have to wait behind walls anymore. Noah, for his part, had grown louder, bolder, more talkative, mimicking Brick's movements, crawling beside him, tossing food under the table during meals, and once even curling up beside him on the floor during a thunderstorm, whispering good boy into his fur over and over until the dog drifted off to sleep. Like lullabies shared between souls who didn't need the same language to understand each other. On the day of the memorial, the town square was filled with more people than it had seen in years, folding chairs stretched across the lawn. Children holding small American flags, veterans in uniform saluting as Gerald's folded flag was placed. On a table beside a framed photo of him walking with Bricks years ago, back when both had stood taller, back when time hadn't yet closed its fist around them. Lila stood beside the mic, trembling slightly, one hand resting on Brick's head, the other holding Daniel's fingers, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but clear, then telling them all what it meant to live next to someone and never really know them, what it meant for a dog to teach an entire town what loyalty looks like, how a baby's curiosity opened a wall and a truth, and how sometimes heroes don't wear uniforms or arrive in flashing lights. Sometimes they come covered in dust, eyes full of memories, paws still bleeding from the past, but hearts wide open. When she finished, there was silence. Not the awkward kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that holds space for everything words can't reach. And then someone began to clap, slow, steady, till the square echoed with applause, not just for Gerald, but for the bond that outlived him, the one that barked through concrete and refused to be buried. After the service, people came forward, not just to pet Bricks or thank the family, but to share their own regrets, stories of neighbors they hadn't checked on, dogs they'd passed in shelters without stopping, relatives whose final chapters were written in isolation. And as the sun began to dip behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the town, something had shifted in Green Rock. Something permanent. Doors that once stayed shut now opened with invitations, old wounds were checked in on, and children who had never thought twice about the animals in their lives now looked at them differently. Maybe they were more than pets. Maybe they were witnesses, quiet keepers of the things we miss. In the weeks that followed, the town's rescue shelter reported a surge in adoptions. A record high, actually, and when asked what caused it, most people just shrugged and said, "That dog, the one from the wall and the shelter, once at risk of closing, now had a waiting list of volunteers and a fund named after Bricks. It's called The Wall That Listened, dedicated to helping overlooked dogs find homes before the world forgets them." Back at the house, life returned to its rhythm, but it was richer now, fuller, like the soil had been turned and made new. And one afternoon, as Lila watched Bricks and Noah chase each other in the yard, leaves swirling in their wake, she whispered, "To Daniel, I think he was meant for us," and Daniel, watching the dog pause every few steps to let the toddler catch up, smiled and said, "No, I think we were meant for him. And I know you're listening now, maybe late at night, with the lights dim. Maybe during a long drive, or maybe while holding your own dog close. And I just want to ask, where are you watching from? And what time is it over there? Because sometimes these stories reach you exactly when they're supposed to.
Ow.
Like a bark from behind a wall you didn't know you'd built. And if this one touched something inside you, let it remind you to check on the quiet ones, the loyal ones, the ones who wait without asking, because sometimes they're the ones who save us before we ever know we needed saving. The seasons shifted slowly in Green Rock, leaves turning amber, air growing crisp. And with it came a peacefulness that settled like morning fog across the town. A softness earned by all that had been revealed, all that had been healed, and within. The quiet heartbeat of that small town, the home where Bricks now lived, pulsed with a new kind of rhythm, one shaped not just by the daily joys of raising a child, but by the constant, steady presence of a dog who had once been forgotten and now became unforgettable. And every day began the same way, with Noah waking just before dawn, his tiny voice humming through the baby monitor, and Bricks already waiting beside the crib, tail tapping against the floor like a metronome for life itself. And together they would start the morning, one learning the world and the other quietly guarding it. Their bond growing not in big dramatic gestures, but in the small, sacred repetitions of trust, of routine, of being seen. The vet had said Bricks might only have a few good years left. Trauma, age, and time had taken their toll, but somehow those years felt like lifetimes, stretched and folded into golden afternoons where Bricks would chase after sticks Noah barely knew how to throw, or warm evenings where Daniel and Lila would sit under fairy lights on the porch, watching their son lean against the dog as he babbled nonsense and Bricks listened like it was scripture, nodding sometimes, eyes half-lidded. And if you looked closely, you could almost see him smile. The town had honored Bricks again, this time by engraving his name on a bronze plaque that stood beside the war memorial, right next to Gerald Whitmore's. 2 soldiers, 1 human, 1 canine, both remembered now, not for how they were lost, but for how they were found. And every so often, a stranger would come to take a photo, to kneel and touch the cold metal, to whisper a thank you to a dog they'd never met, but somehow felt they knew. But life, as it always does, moved forward, and just after Noah's 3rd birthday, something began to shift in Bricks, subtle at first. A slower rise from naps, a longer pause at the stairs, a little more hesitation before jumping into the car. And while Lila tried to tell herself it was just age, just winter stiffness, she knew deep down it was more than that. And so did Bricks, because he began doing things differently too. Spending more time watching from doorways, less time playing, more time pressing his body gently against whoever needed comfort without. Being asked, and there were nights when he'd slip into Noah's room after bedtime, not to sleep, but to sit upright and still, like a statue cast in devotion, like he was memorizing the child's breath, the slope of his cheeks, the exact sound of his dreams. And one morning, when the world outside was covered in frost and the fire in the hearth crackled softly, Bricks didn't rise from his bed, didn't stretch or yawn or pad into the kitchen like he always had. And Noah, now old enough to notice, crawled beside him and shook his paw gently, whispering, "Come on, it's breakfast." And when Bricks didn't move, didn't blink, just stayed curled in that perfect, peaceful stillness, the boy didn't cry. Right away, he just sat. Beside him, small hand resting on thick fur, eyes watching the soft rise and fall that had always been there, now gone. Lila came next, then Daniel, and the house filled with a silence louder than any storm. A silence made of love, of grief, of gratitude so deep it could only be felt in the ache behind your ribs. Always laid on, carried him out into the yard, and buried him under the old maple tree, the one that dropped golden leaves like confetti every fall. The one Noah had taken his first step under, the one that had stood long before Bricks arrived, and would stand long after, roots tangled now with a story no storm could erase. The entire town came, again, this time without cameras or speeches. Just hands holding hands, tears wiped into scarves. And as Daniel placed a small photo of Bricks beside the grava, snapshot of him and Noah, napping together on the couch, someone began to hum a lullaby, soft and trembling, and soon more voices joined, not loud, not perfect, but real, and Lila whispered, "He was our miracle." And somewhere nearby, a dog barked, just once, sharp and clean, as if answering from a distance. Noah, too young to understand death the way adults did, asked only one question that day. Will he come back tomorrow? And Lila, kneeling beside him, pulled him into her arms and said, "No, sweetheart, but he'll stay here," pressing her hand gently against his chest. "He'll always stay here." Time passed as it must, and Noah grew, his legs longer, his words clearer, but he still spoke about Bricks as if he were just in the next room, still saved a spot for him beside his bed, still carried his old collar on hikes, still paused sometimes, mid-sentence, and looked out the window, as if expecting him to come trotting back with a stick in his mouth and a twinkle in his eyes. And if you were to visit Green Rock now, you'd find the trees still standing, the plaques still gleaming, and on certain days, when the wind moves just right and the sun cuts through the leaves like a memory unfolding, you might see a boy and his parents sitting quietly beneath the branches, eyes closed, lips curled into smiles, remembering a dog who taught them what it meant to be loved without condition. So I'll ask you one final time, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? 'Cause whether it's morning or night, whether you're wrapped in silence or holding your own dog close, just know this: some stories don't end when the heart stops beating. Some stories echo in the spaces where love was once given freely, where loyalty stood like a wall no pain could break. And if you're listening now, if this story reached you across the noise of your day, maybe it's because Brick still has one more job to do. Remind you that every silent hero, every forgotten soul, every faithful friend waiting behind a wall deserves to be seen. And when you finally hear them, when you finally open that door, everything in your life might change forever. And if this story touched you even a little, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what memory of your dog will you carry for the rest of your life?